This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 6 of Exploring Drupal 8, Intermediate Module Development Concepts. Welcome back, everyone.
Hey, Steve.
Morning.
How's everybody doing today?
Good morning. Doing great.
Great. So on our panel, as usual, we have John Picozzi from Oomph.
Good morning, Internet friends.
Good. We also have Nick Laughlin from way up there in Worcester, who had a tree lighting last night.
Good morning. Good morning.
How are you today? Good?
Pretty good.
That's great. We also have from Sago Solutions, we have Nick and Mike. We're on a first-name basis now, guys.
All right. Excellent. Six episodes deep. We got there.
All right, good. So we're in episode 6 today. We're talking about intermediate module development concepts. And what's interesting is this is the last episode of this little audio series we're putting together. So if you've enjoyed it, let us know. If you haven't enjoyed us, don't tell us anything. And we're going to have a follow-up webinar, 2 of them, on January 12th and January 19th at noon p.m. Eastern. And it's going to give you an opportunity to see some of these concepts on a screen. We're going to briefly go over the same sort of content, but with a key point at the end being that we're going to have a Q&A, so you can ask some questions. So it's a good condensed 1 hour of, hey, I've got some Drupal 8 questions, and can you guys help me out and answer them for me? So you can sign up for that at exploringdrupal8.com, and that is right around the corner. You know, January 8th or 12th sounded like it was a long time away when we started to plan this, right? But it's about 2 months.
Wow.
About 2 months away.
Yeah, started at NetCamp, right? NetCamp was 2 months ago.
1 month. I said 2 months. It's 1 month away, right?
Yeah. It was about 2 months when we started, which seemed like eternity.
Yeah.
But that has gone by quickly.
So today we have a brain burner. So we're following up from the last episode 5 where we did some intro topics. We called it actually basic module development concepts. So today we're going to talk about intermediate. So we're going to take one more step forward, and we're going to kick that off with plugins.
Awesome. So yeah, so we talked a little bit about plugins in the last episode, and we talked about it really just within the context of a block. And a block is really one example of a plugin within Drupal 8. There are many different plugins within the context of Drupal 8. We also talked about services, and I think there's been some kind of confusion, and I probably need to explore a little bit more too about the differences between the two. Anybody here know the differences between the two?
Oh, now you're going to start quizzing us?
Yeah, I'm quizzing now. Episode 6 is the quiz time. So I'll explain it. I won't put everyone on. So from the way I interpret it today is plugins are discoverable and services are put into the services container. So in this episode, we're really touching on 2 of these ideas. We're talking about plugins, which are discoverable, and then we're going to be talking about dependency injection, which kind of really encapsulates the idea of this service container. So talking about plugins, they're discoverable. What does that mean exactly? That means that when we define our plugin, the Drupal system can actually discover what plugins are defined within all of our modules and then build a collection of those plugins that are available to the system. So a good example of that, I think easily to conceptualize, is our block system. We can define an arbitrary number of blocks within an arbitrary number of modules within our solution. And when we go to that block administration screen, we're going to see a list of blocks. And those list of blocks, that is built through the discoverability of the plugins within the system.
So is part of the difference that plugins are discoverable by annotation? Is that part of what makes them a plugin?
That's part of it. I think the core concept though is that they're discoverable by defining a certain interface. So the idea of discoverability is that I can find within the system any object that defines a given interface. So if my interface says you need to have a run method, we're going out there and saying, show me every class that defines that run method. And there we go. Now we can actually say we discovered all the run methods. Now that is achieved through annotation. The annotation system actually tells Drupal about the plugin at hand, what type of plugin it actually is, and it also tells it some contextual information like the name of the block, the machine name of that block or something like that, so that we can actually see it on that screen for our site builders.
What kind of performance implications does that have? I mean, is that run just when you're visiting a page that requires it, or is it just run occasionally and cached? How does that work?
Yeah, so I believe it's run occasionally. You do have to clear the cache when you're defining these things to have it show up. It's not run on every request, and it probably is a lot like our the module page in Drupal 7, where it is running on the block when you go to the block administration page or any page that requests a listing of them.
Okay.
Yes, that's now the actual annotation piece in terms of performance. It is using the doctrine system. So this goes back to a few episodes ago of Getting Off the Island. We are leveraging this doctrine annotation system. It doesn't use that ORM layer, which I think doctrine is more famous for. We're not using that. We're just using the annotations piece. And there is kind of like I want to say like a domain specific language wrapped around these annotations. And I definitely encourage folks to go in and explore the code. It's a lot easier to explore plugins within the context of Drupal 8, because within any module in the system, you can even go into core. If you go into the source directory, there's going to be a plugins, if it defines plugins, a plugins directory. And within that, you're going to see directories for each plugin that the system defines. So you'll see a block directory or maybe a fields directory. And you can go in and explore what the specific annotations are for each plugin type. So that kind of leads me into what other things are plugins besides just blocks. We've really just talked about blocks so far. Things like REST resources. So if we wanted to define a resource to maybe an entity via the REST module, we can define that through the plugin system. Things like fields. So if we want to define a new type of field within our system, we do that with a plugin and just annotate it within the comments. Field widgets. So if we wanted to take a new field widget and say, we want a new type of calendar selector, calendar picker for our date fields, we could do that through the plugin system.
So like a field base, you mean is a plugin but not a field instance?
Right. So the field base would be a plugin.
Okay.
Image effects. So things like, when we define image styles and stuff like that, those are also plugins. So that's kind of exciting. We could see a lot of different image effects come into the system through the plugins. Things like mail backends. So our mail backend is a plugin. I don't know if there's any work being done with the like the Mandrill system and things like that, but I would imagine that they're defining that as a plugin to replace the default mail backends. And we've probably used Devel before with some of the different, when we're local, so we don't send out emails to all of our customers locally. All that will now be defined through plugins.
So it's like a way to swap out methods for taking care of certain functionality, whether it's mail or providing a field or something else. Okay.
Yeah.
So something I'm having trouble wrapping my head around with plugins is at Oomph we're also a WordPress shop, and in the WordPress world, plugins are synonymous with modules in the Drupal world. So now you're saying that Drupal has plugins as well. Can you define a little bit what the difference is, just at a really high level, between modules and plugins? For me, basically, it sounds like A plugin is more very much code related, and adding an option to like a drop down for image effect or something like that, is where a module is very functional and like has a UI and all that sort of stuff. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate statement. I think the core is that modules can define multiple plugins, and modules themselves can also define their own plugin types. So we can define a whole new kind of plugin system in a given module, and then other contributed modules can extend off of that and provide plugins that define, extend that functionality. I think a good example that's been more of a traditional example, and I think a lot of the idea came from, is views, and specifically the CTools module and the plugin system within that. So views in D8 and really in D7 has been powered by the idea of plugins. So you can think of plugins not as a full kind of package of functionality like what a module would be, but more of a subcomponent that can be swapped out within larger components in the system. So speaking about views is a good example because there's a lot of different components within views, right? We have different ways to output our information. So we can say, show it as a table, show it as an unordered list, and things like that. All of those pieces are defined as plugins in the system. And they're all then used within the context of the views module.
Okay, so a bunch of different things there. So you've got the displays. So if you were to add a new type of display, by default you have like page, block, and a couple of others. That would be plugin. Same thing as possibly defining a new type of entity to create. Like you can create a view based on users or based on content. That would be a plugin as well. So it's
Yep,
that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's and in Drupal 7, that's kind of how we did it within views. But it's definitely different in D8. I mean, we're going along that idea of having extending the base classes and things like that, and having everything be objects and all that. Even though in views in D7 it was very object oriented. So there's definitely a lot to explore in the plugin system, and I encourage everyone to kind of install the examples module, explore the core code. There's a lot of great examples out there.
Yeah, if you go into if you have Drupal 8 installed, and you just take a look at the core/modules folder and look through the modules and drill into the source folder, you'll see the plugins defined.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into the next topic here, which kind of switches gears a little bit, which is dependency injection. Dependency injection is an idea that I think a lot of people hear at first, or maybe even explore, and they're like, "Wow, this is a complicated idea. I'm not understanding it." But it is at its core a very simple idea. Basically, it's the idea of telling your classes what its dependencies are, instead of having our classes define their dependencies within itself. So what does that mean exactly? To give you an example, say we had a class that sent emails, and that class needed to instantiate another class that was responsible for actually sending those emails. And that email class had a send method on it. Now, without dependency injection, we would define a class, and then maybe within the constructor of that class, or maybe within a method in that class, we would actually create a new instance of that mail I'll call dependency. By creating that instance, by saying, my variable equals new mail, I'm now explicitly defining a dependency within the class I'm in to that mail class. It's a hard dependency. I need that to be able to use my class. Now, that's bad on a couple of fronts, but it's really bad in terms of testing, because now when we test just the class we're talking about, we need to make sure that we have that mail class available, and we're really going to be testing the mail class as well. So if something goes wrong in the mail class, it's going to also break our class that's using it. How do we get around that? we get around that by injecting that mail class into the class that we're developing. So one way that we do it, and the way that we're doing it a lot in Drupal 8, is through a constructor injection. So we actually inject that mail class within the constructor of the class we're implementing. So the constructor has a parameter, and that parameter would be a mail interface. And then within the constructor, that's when we would instantiate the mail interface.
How does that change if something breaks in the mail class that doesn't break mine? I'm not following how that creates.
Yeah, so now when we're testing our class that we're developing, we don't have to pass in, because it's an interface, we don't have to pass in a full implementation of that mail class. We can stub it out. So when we stub the code, we can implement that interface, but maybe have the send method just write to a log on our system, instead of actually going through the whole routine of sending an email. So when we write our tests, we would write a piece of stub code and then pass that in or inject that in to the class that we're actually testing. And then now we're only testing the code that we want to test without having to worry about the implementation of whatever mail class we're sending in. That mail class should have its own set of tests to test its functionality. Does that make sense?
Yes, at a high level.
Yeah. So, I think the core here is, and this is why it gets kind of hairy when we talk about it, is the core is we are telling our software what it's using. We're not letting our software create its own stuff automatically, or create its own tools automatically. We're handing it its tools. And how are we doing that in Drupal 8? We're doing that through the service container. So we talked about the service container a little bit in the previous episode, but the service container is basically an object that keeps track of all of the services in our system. So going back to the example of say a mail object or some other, or the shape example where we have a service that calculates area of a shape, we can have a shape manager class or something like that then takes as a parameter in its constructor a shape interface, and then actually goes out to the service container and extracts that shape service that's defined in our system, and then instantiate. So our service container locally can be different from the service container up in different environments, and we can be creating different services within those environments, which would give us completely different functionality when we're testing. And I like going back to the mail example because I think that's something we can really think about when we're sending emails. Locally, we don't want to send emails, right? So dependency injection really is just telling our classes what they're using. And you can see a lot of examples in that within the core code within Drupal 8. There's some interesting syntax. We'll go into some of that within the webinar on how it actually creates the classes from the service container. It does that through an interface as well, which is the container injection interface, which defines a single create method. That create method basically takes as input the service container, and then it creates the dependencies within it. And then it actually calls the constructor of the class. It's actually quite interesting how it works. So we'll be seeing some of that code in the webinar. So did I fry everyone's brain in this one?
Well, I think what happens here is that if there's new terminology, right, and there's new concepts, and you start to put that stuff together, and you're sitting here trying to map it to what you already are doing and familiar with in Drupal 7, and there is no correlation to grasp onto. Like unless you're doing this type of coding in another place, I don't think there's an analogy in Drupal 7 that you can say it's similar to this. You know what I mean? It's hard to put your head around it. I think our listeners will find some of this stuff a little bit. Container injection interface. I mean, you say that and you're like, what? You're trying to get past the 3 words, even before you're trying to put some thought around it. So, but if you're going to be doing this work, these are the purpose of this session is to start to introduce people to these concepts, and you're not going to understand them all right away. But we're pointing out the things that people are going to need to understand to be successful. So it's a great way to probably start to hear the language and start to hear the concepts.
Yeah, I mean, going back to it too, I think the core of this is you're telling your classes what they're using. As long as you can get that, we're in good shape.
Right.
One of the important things to look at too is that while this is new in the Drupal world, it's not new in the coding world. I mean, dependency injection has been around for quite a while, so we're not saying they're brand new concepts. They're just new to people that learned coding through Drupal 7. Right. And it will help you in the wider world if you're looking at modifying, adding another Symfony module or Twig module or something. You'll be able to translate that knowledge.
I think that's a great point. I mean, as Drupal developers ourselves, being able to grasp these concepts gives us more of a kind of an outside world perspective and makes us more valuable in the greater context of software development. So our skills are now transferable outside of just Drupal. We don't have this kind of like, all I know is Drupalisms. I can maybe go into the Java world if I wanted to, or maybe we can attract Java people to us, kind of like going back to that building bridges and getting off the island idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely think that what you just said there, Nick, is the other side of that equation too. It's going to help. Drupal 8 is definitely going to help with these concepts to take what would historically been Drupal developers and kind of broaden their scope a bit and make it more of just object-oriented, seasoned type of developers, and in turn it's two-sided. Bring other object-oriented, seasoned developers onto the Drupal platform who historically have maybe shied away from it because of how unique Drupal has been in the past. So all these concepts, I think, just kind of open this up, which is very exciting for Drupal. So it's a good time.
Absolutely.
So do we have another topic here?
No, I think that's it. I think that's what we wanted to cover in this episode.
So we did wrap it up. I mean, the last 15 minutes to me went by pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things for further exploring. Things we didn't touch on, things like the Entity API, which is fully baked in Drupal 8. And like I said before, I mean, there's a slew of really interesting APIs and interfaces to kind of just explore. Going back to the exploring Drupal idea here. The examples module, definitely check that out. And we do have that spin code available on Stackstarter. So it gets you right into the code base to start looking at it. That spin code is talking Drupal. So we'll have that available by the time this airs. And
so just to explain that a little bit. So Stackstarter will give someone a Drupal 8 environment through the browser with command line and full access to everything without needing to install anything in the machine. They don't need to install MAMP, nothing. You're just pretty much up and running.
Yep, up and running, and within a second, you're going to have full IDE, full console access, and the running application itself. We're using it a lot internally for training, and it's been working quite well.
So if someone decides to, what does the Talking Drupal spin code actually give them?
That's going to give them access to a full D8 development environment. So
okay. So what do they do so they've built something there? How do they get that can they get it to their machine later?
Yeah, so we do have an export button on there. So you can export. It's going to do a drush, basically just a drush ARB, and download it to your machine.
Okay, great. So if someone invests 3 or 4 hours in their playing and they just want to continue outside of Stackstarter because they're now convinced they have a way to do that.
Yep.
Great. And how much does Stackstarter cost with that Talking Drupal?
Right now it's free. So we're not charging for it.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking for feedback, and anybody that uses it, definitely shoot us an email. We're out there, and love to talk about it.
Okay, so what other questions does anyone have that's been burning on them with Drupal 8 that they want to just get out here now? Anything?
When will it be ready for prime time?
Well, it's actually interesting. We have
Stack Starter or Drupal 8?
Both, all of the above.
So yeah, that's an interesting question. We have we run the Long Island Drupal users group, and our next meetup next month we have an interesting speaker from Mike Myers from Acquia coming down talking about that exact thing, about why early adoption of Drupal 8 is beneficial for businesses. And I'm curious to kind of hear. Mike is he's the VP of large scale Drupal, I believe is his title, or Drupal
I think he just switched roles. He's VP of Developer Relations now.
Developer Relations, yeah. And he's obviously a good voice on that front. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more, because I'm kind of on the fence personally. Should we be waiting? Does it is early adoption? What are the benefits of that? Because obviously there's a slew of contributed modules, rules, and others that still are not kind of there for Drupal 8 that I consider to be, core. We need these here if we're going to build, in real production. So it's I'm curious to learn about that too.
I think it comes down to this, what the functionality of the website is. I think there's lots of use cases for Drupal 8 today.
Absolutely.
Production sites that make sense, and then there's even more use cases where it's not appropriate at all, just because of the things you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that holds true just for any
Right.
Drupal or any platform in general. It's the right tool for the right job, and I'd like to say we can solve anything with Drupal, but there's obviously the right tool for the right job to have in mind as well.
The sooner you jump in, though, the better you are going to be, though. I do believe. I think running into issues and solving them helps you learn the product way better. If it just works, you often never go underneath the hood and check things out. It's only when you're solving problems that you learn the most.
Yeah, and for businesses, I think you get, if it meets your needs, you can get more longevity, from the version. If you're, involved with it from an early state, you're going to be on that version longer and not have to worry about when, Drupal 9 comes out, which I don't think we have to worry about, anytime soon. But,
and we're also seeing a lot of way more D6 interest than D7. I mean, a lot of people invested heavily in D7 pretty recently, and they're not ready to just. It doesn't make sense to go to D8 just financially. And guys that have D6 sites have been around for 5+ years. It may make sense for them, and we're even seeing that within the migration, the migration pieces itself. There's a lot more of a migration path for D6 sites today than there is for D7 sites.
Well, the thing that freaks D6 people out, and it should, is that they've been on D6 for so long, and now they're being forced to get off of D6. But the problem they have is that all of the capability in D8 is not there yet. It won't be there by the time D6 is basically unsupported. Now they're saying, okay, we have to go to D7. And then they're saying, well, yeah, you know what? Well, D7 is only going to be here for 4 years. So now we're going to be going through this whole thing again. So it's really a challenging thing for people on D6 sites that have a lot of functionality. They're in a tough position.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, I'd say that's definitely the most challenging position is a very full-featured D6 site that needs to move or that is looking to move. It's a challenging time for them to kind of wait it out. Do we wait, or do we jump ship right now? Or that's interesting.
Yeah.
D6 is also released 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So it's really showing its age.
Absolutely.
All right, so I think we're at the end of this brief introduction to Drupal 8, which encompassed the last 6 episodes in Talking Drupal. So you'll see this show listed in the Talking Drupal feed. It'll just be called Exploring Drupal 8 instead. So by the time you're listening to this, you probably already know that. And Talking Drupal will continue its regular bi-weekly schedule. And all of these episodes, as you've seen already, are just going to be released in one day at one time. So you can binge listen to them.
Netflix binge.
Yes. So you'd be binge listening before the webinars. The idea would be, take a listen to these shows and come to the webinars with your questions and maybe learn a little bit more. So the webinar on January 12th will focus on the first 3 episodes that we covered, which was site building and theming. And the second webinar on January 19th will focus on module development that we've done in the last 3 episodes. So go to exploringdrupal.com and sign up.
ExploringDrupal8.com.
Did I say 7?
No, you said Exploring
left off the 8.
Oh, exploringdrupal8.com. Thank you. That's typical. So, all right, let's wrap this up. John Picozzi. Are you still out there? He's out there, and he's got his Cylon microphone with him. Thank you. He's got to fix that quickly. That's all right.
And we're back.
John, so are you guys at Oomph doing any Drupal 8 work yet?
We are. We're actually kicking off Drupal 8 project. Actually, I think we already kicked it off. So we are looking forward to that and learning and getting in there and tearing things apart.
Excellent. So contacting you or Oomph, where would someone go?
You can find me at John Picozzi on all the major social networks and always on at oomphinc.com.
All right, excellent. How about you, Nick?
You can find me online at NixFan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere. And as for Drupal 8, I've got a project in mind for it. I think one of the big things I need to figure out that we didn't talk too much about in this, but maybe if somebody has questions in the webinar, is hosting and finding a way that's compatible. Drupal 7, Drupal 8 hosting is compatible.
Interesting question, huh?
So it was an issue that we dealt with for a while with Drupal 6 and Drupal 7, but
right.
We'll see.
So I'm Stephen Cross. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH, not with a V. And you can find my company website at parallaxinfotech.com. And want to thank you guys again for joining us, Nick and Mike from Sago Solutions in Long Island. And where can people reach out to you?
So we're coming from Long Island. Yeah, so I'm at Direct on Twitter, and you can find us at sagosolutions.com, SEGO solutions.com. And so check out stackstarter.io. One other project we didn't mention, which we did before Stackstarter, was trydrupal8.com, which is similar to Stackstarter, but without the kind of coding backend. It's just a spin up a D8 instance. That's been running for almost 3 years now.
That's you guys? I didn't realize that.
That's us.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I've been on there.
Nice. Awesome.
Okay.
So one that was kind of the predecessor to or the birth of Stackstarter.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
I am mmars9 on all the social networks, and thank you guys again for having us. This has been a great series, and we really enjoyed it. So hopefully we could do more in the future with things like this. This is great.
Yeah, it was fun for us as well. So take care, guys. Talk to you soon, and we'll see you on January 12th.
See you then.
Take care.
Bye.